My name is Marjorie Elwood. I'm 63. That morning, the air over Charleston carried the kind of warmth that only comes after a long rain, the scent of wet magnolia leaves mixing with the salt that drifts in from the harbor. I woke early, as I always do, before the bells of St. Michael's began their steady chime. Birthdays had never been a big affair in my family, but this one felt different. My daughter, Laura, had promised to take me out for lunch, just the two of us. She'd said, the words had made something stir in me, an ache that felt almost like excitement. I stood before the mirror, smoothing my hair into place and choosing the soft blue sweater Daniel used to love. He'd always said it made my eyes look like the tide just before dusk calm, a little tired, but still holding light. 8 years had passed since the heart attack took him, yet I still heard his voice when I reached for that sweater, as if approval could echo through fabric. Downstairs, I set the small oak table for two. The lemon cake had cooled on the counter overnight. The frosting still glistened. I spooned shrimp salad into a crystal bowl, arranged slices of tomato, wiped the rim clean. These small gestures steadied me. After Daniel's death, keeping things orderly had become my way of holding life together. It made me feel that if the table was set, perhaps the world still was too. At 10 o'clock, sunlight spilled through the blinds in soft stripes. The house hummed faintly, the refrigerator's quiet rhythm, the ticking clock in the hallway. I turned on the radio for company, an old jazz station Daniel used to favor, and tried not to look at the empty chair across from mine. By 11, the frosting had lost its shine. I refilled the kettle, brewed tea, and told myself she was just running late. Lara was always running late. She had her own world now, a husband named Ben, a marketing job, the kind of calendar that seemed to rule her days. Still, she'd sounded sincere last night when she said she wanted time with me. It's been too long. Mom, she'd said, no fancy brunches, just a drive and a little surprise. At noon, the phone rang. I nearly dropped the knife I was using to cut the lemon cake. Hi, sweetheart, I said, trying not to sound too eager. Hey, Mom. Her voice was quick, distracted, like she was already somewhere else. I'm on my way. Don't eat yet. Okay, I've got something planned. Just dress comfy. I'll pick you up in 20. She hung up before I could ask what kind of surprise required comfortable clothes. I looked down at my sweater and hesitated. Maybe I should change into something lighter, but I didn't. That sweater was my quiet armor. I packed up the cake, covered the salad, and glanced at the old photograph of us on the mantel, Lara at 8, missing her 2 front teeth, clinging to my arm. The smile in that picture had always been my proof that I'd done something right. When the car horn sounded outside, I slipped on my flats and locked the door behind me. Lara's black SUV idled by the curb, its windows tinted darker than I remembered. She waved, but didn't get out. I climbed in, careful not to spill the cake resting in my lap. Happy birthday, she said, smiling tightly as she adjusted her sunglasses. Ready for your surprise? Her perfume filled the car, sharp, floral, expensive. I tried to catch her eyes, but she was already looking at the road. The air conditioner hummed. The streetlights blurred past in gold streaks as we turned toward the bridge, away from downtown and the little cafes we used to visit. Something in me shifted, quiet and uneasy, as the familiar streets began to fade behind us. Charleston shimmered that afternoon, the sunlight filtering through curtains of moss that draped the old live oaks. The streets still smelled faintly of rain, that sweet mixture of brick, salt, and jasmine that I'd loved since I was a girl. Lara drove with one hand on the wheel, her nails painted a pale, deliberate pink. The radio murmured something low and rhythmic, but she didn't seem to hear it. I tried to start a conversation, to stitch some thread of warmth between us. The azaleas bloomed early this year, I said, "You should see the ones near the old post office. They're enormous now, like pink fireworks." She smiled. The kind of smile that appeared and disappeared before it reached her eyes. "That's nice, Mom." Her gaze dropped back to her phone, thumb flicking across the screen. I kept going, as if the right topic might open her up again. "You remember when we used to walk to the art fair downtown? The one with the watercolor tents near Waterfront Park? I was thinking, maybe we could go this spring." She didn't answer at first. The turn signal clicked. She switched lanes. "We'll see," she said finally. Her voice too soft to be unkind, but too flat to mean yes. The conversation dissolved into the hum of tires on asphalt. I folded my hands in my lap, feeling the faint vibration of the road. For years, I'd told myself that silence between us was just comfort, that we'd reached the kind of understanding that didn't need words. But lately, silence felt like distance I couldn't measure anymore. We passed Colonial Lake, the water glinting under the sky like a mirror. Families strolled the path. A man jogged by with a golden retriever. I waved absently through the window, though no one saw. "Where are we going?" I asked after a while. "I thought we were headed downtown." Lara kept her eyes on the road. "It's not far, just a small detour. You'll see." The city thinned around us, the pastel houses giving way to wider streets. The tidy gardens replaced by stretches of marshland. The air changed, too. Saltier and heavier. My heart began to tap quietly against my ribs. I glanced at her profile, the same cheekbones Daniel had, though sharper now, drawn by years of worry or ambition, I couldn't tell which. Her jaw tightened as she drove, as if every turn required effort. I tried again. "You said you've been working on a new project at the firm. Is it going well? Do you like your new office?" "It's fine, Mom." I nodded, though the words felt like walls closing in. I turned to the window, watching a line of pelicans glide low over the water. My reflection hovered faintly against the glass, smaller than I remembered. When the car veered onto the James Island Connector Bay, I felt the shift immediately. The bridge stretched wide and silver over the marsh. Sunlight bouncing off the railings. We never took this route. Downtown was the other way. "Lara," I said gently, "I think you missed the turn." "No," she said, eyes steady on the horizon. "We're still on track." Something in her tone, calm but distant, tightened my throat. I opened my mouth to ask where we were headed, but the words tangled somewhere between trust and dread. The marsh gave way to quiet neighborhoods, then to long stretches of manicured lawns, white fences, clean signage, perfect symmetry, the kind of place that looked too peaceful to question. Lara's phone buzzed. She silenced it without looking down. I pressed my palms together, tracing the edge of my wedding ring with my thumb. The sweater's fabric felt suddenly too warm, clinging to my arms. I forced a small laugh. "This is quite the mystery tour, honey. You're not whisking me off to the beach, are you?" She smiled again, brief and polite. "You'll find out soon enough." Her eyes stayed on the road, and I watched as the last familiar landmarks of Charleston disappeared behind us. The bridge receded in the rearview mirror, the city fading into distance. Ahead, the road curved between tall oaks and brick walls, and for the first time that day, the air inside the car felt colder than the air outside. The car slowed as we turned into a long, curving driveway lined with hydrangeas. At first, I thought it might be a restaurant or a park. The grounds were too neat, the air too still. Ahead stood a red brick complex with gleaming windows and white columns. A polished sign read Willow Creek Senior Living. My breath caught. "Lara," I said softly, almost laughing. "This looks like one of those care facilities. Why are we—" She didn't answer. The SUV rolled to a stop beneath a circular awning. A woman in scrubs stepped forward. Her smile professional, her clipboard ready. Before I could form another word, Laura opened her door and got out. "Stay here a second." "Mom, I'll help with the paperwork," she said, smoothing her blouse as if preparing for a meeting. The nurse greeted her warmly. "Miss Elwood, we've got everything set up for your mother's arrival. Just need a couple of final signatures." My heartbeat became a noise in my ears. Arrival. I pushed open my door and stepped out into the heavy, perfumed air. "What's going on?" My voice shook despite my effort to keep it calm. "Lara, why is she saying that?" Lara turned toward me, her face composed but pale. "Mom, we've talked about this," she said gently, as though explaining something to a child. "You've been alone too long. It's not safe. You fell last month in the kitchen, remember? You told me you'd been dizzy. I tripped over a rug, I whispered." She reached for my arm. "This place is wonderful. They have classes, gardens, a book club, everything you like. It's just until you feel more stable." The nurse stood by politely, avoiding my eyes. Behind her, through the wide glass doors, I saw an elderly man being wheeled down a hallway, a blanket tucked neatly over his knees. Another woman sat in a chair by the window, staring at nothing. A strange quiet spread inside me, the kind that comes before tears. "You can't be serious," I said. Lara's smile tightened. She opened the trunk and pulled out a floral suitcase, the one Daniel and I used to take on our summer trips to Edisto Beach. The tag still bore my old handwriting, M. Elwood. My house key glinted from the zipper pull. "You went through my things," I said. "I packed for you," she replied. "So you'd have what you need." The words felt heavy. Rehearsed. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't name, something between pity and impatience. "Let's go inside." "Mom," she said softly, "you'll thank me once you've settled." I didn't move. The nurse approached, her shoes whispering against the pavement. "We'll take good care of you, Mrs. Elwood," she said. Her tone was kind but distant, as though she were reading from a script. Lara placed a gentle hand on my back, guiding me forward. The automatic doors opened with a sigh, releasing a faint scent of disinfectant and lilies. The sound of the city vanished behind me. No traffic, no seabirds, just muted footsteps and the low hum of fluorescent light. Inside, the walls were painted beige and hung with cheerful landscapes. A fountain gurgled softly near the reception desk. Everything was clean, polished, quiet. I looked down at my suitcase, then at my daughter, the woman I had once carried through fevered nights. The child I'd sworn to protect from every storm. Her hand lingered on my shoulder. Steady but unfamiliar. "This will be good for you," she said. "You'll see." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe there was still love beneath the distance in her voice. But as the nurse led me toward an elevator and the doors closed between us, all I could see was the space growing wider where love used to live. The first thing I noticed was the smell disinfectant mixed with lemon polish, sharp enough to make my eyes sting. A small vase of carnations sat on the dresser, their petals already curling at the edges. Someone had placed them there before I arrived. A gesture meant to seem kind, but it only made the room feel borrowed. The nurse, her name was Carla, I think wheeled my suitcase to the foot of the bed and gave me a practiced smile. "Dinner's at 5. There's a television remote in the drawer. Orientation's tomorrow morning." Her voice was polite, distant, the kind that suggested she'd already said these words 100 times today. When she left, the quiet closed in behind her like a slow-moving tide. The room was smaller than I'd expected. 2 narrow beds divided by a single nightstand. A dresser beneath a window that faced a brick wall. My new roommate sat in the chair near the window, humming to herself something faint and familiar. Maybe a hymn. She didn't look up when I entered, just kept her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes half closed as if she were praying or remembering. I opened the top drawer of the dresser and found a folded towel, a bar of soap, and a small welcome card with my name printed in cheerful blue letters. "We're so glad you're here." I stared at it until the words blurred. The clock above the door ticked loudly, every second punctuating how far I was from everything that once felt real. My house on King Street, my garden, the kitchen that still smelled faintly of Daniel's aftershave, each memory pressed closer as if to remind me what I'd lost. At dinner, I sat among strangers who chewed quietly and stared at their plates. Someone asked me where I was from, and my throat tightened before I could answer. I wanted to say home, but that word no longer seemed to belong to me. By the time the lights dimmed for the night, my suitcase was still unpacked. I lay on the stiff mattress, the hum of the air vent filling the silence. Across the room, my roommate's humming faded into a soft snore. The ceiling above me was textured like sand, catching the weak glow of the hallway light seeping under the door. I stared at it for a long time, trying to find a shape, a pattern, something to hold on to, but there was nothing, just the quiet weight of a room that wasn't mine, and the faint echo of a door closing somewhere deep inside me. The days began to lose their edges. Morning and evening felt the same here, stitched together by the sound of carts rolling through the hallway and the faint buzz of fluorescent lights that never seemed to rest. Breakfasts arrived on identical trays, lukewarm coffee, a small bowl of oatmeal, a plastic cup of fruit suspended in syrup. I ate because there was nothing else to do. The nurses moved efficiently, their shoes whispering against the linoleum floors. They called me sweetheart and darling in voices that were kind but hollow, as though affection could be part of their job description. I smiled back, pretending it was enough, pretending I wasn't invisible. Between the medication checks and the soft shuffle of slippers, the hours stretched into something endless. The TV in the common room played game shows at full volume, yet the noise only deepened the silence inside me. I started counting small things to mark time: the flicker of the hallway light outside my door, the number of times my roommate hummed Amazing Grace before dinner, the way the air smelled faintly of detergent before the rain. At night, the memories came in waves. Lara at 7, standing in the backyard with skinned knees and dirt under her nails, holding up a crushed magnolia bloom. "It still smells good, Mom," she'd said, smiling wide through her missing teeth. I could still see the sunlight catching in her hair, the way she used to grab my hand without hesitation. She was a child who believed I could fix anything: a broken toy, a nightmare, a bad grade. Every time I told her, "You're safe, sweetheart," I had meant it with everything I had. Somewhere along the years, those words turned into background noise, something she outgrew. I remembered her first heartbreak, how she cried into my shoulder until my blouse was damp. The night she left for college, she had hugged me so tight, I could feel her heartbeat against mine. "You'll never lose me," she'd whispered. That was the last time she said it. The woman who signed my name on those papers at Willow Creek didn't look like that girl. Her face was harder now, polished, distant. I wondered when she'd stopped seeing me as her mother and started seeing me as something to manage, a task on her list, on her. Sometimes I thought about calling her, though I no longer had a phone. I imagined her voice, brisk and efficient, saying she did what was best for me. Maybe she even believed it. Each night, I closed my eyes and told myself I'd forgive her one day. But the quiet made forgiveness feel like another chore, something heavy I wasn't ready to lift. The more I remembered, the more the memories hurt, pressing down like the air before a storm, soft, heavy, and impossible to escape. Her name was Chloe. I first noticed her because she didn't rush. Most of the nurses moved with the rhythm of routine check charts, adjust blankets, smile, leave. But Chloe lingered, not long enough to be noticed by others, just long enough to make you feel seen. She couldn't have been more than 28. with a calm, unhurried voice that softened the sterile air of the room. One afternoon, she came to take my blood pressure and paused when she saw the small sketch I'd been making on the corner of a napkin. A vase of carnations, half finished. "You draw," she said, almost to herself. "I used to," I replied, folding the napkin before she could see the tremor in my hand. "Used to means you still can," she smiled, setting the cuff aside. "I'll bring you proper paper. We can't have you using napkins forever." I didn't expect her to follow through, but the next morning, a small sketch pad appeared on my nightstand with a note written in careful handwriting. "For when you remember how..." I stared at the pad for a long time before touching it. The paper felt both familiar and foreign, like the first touch of sunlight after a long winter. My hand hesitated, but eventually, the pencil began to move slow, unsure, but alive. Lines turned into petals, petals into light. The act of creating something, even small, filled the silence with a kind of fragile warmth. When Chloe returned later, she looked at the drawing and nodded as if she'd known I would do it. "You have a gentle hand," she said. "My grandmother painted too. She used to say the hardest part isn't starting, it's believing you still can." I didn't know how to answer, so I just smiled. It felt strange, that smile rusty, like something unused for too long. Over the next few days, Chloe stopped by during her breaks. She asked questions no one else asked about Daniel, about Charleston's harbor, about the books I used to read before sleep became harder than staying awake. She didn't interrupt when I spoke, didn't correct my pauses or soften my confessions. Her presence felt risky, somehow too real for a place built on polite distance. One evening, she leaned against the doorframe after her shift, the hallway lights dim behind her. "You know," she said, "sometimes people get sent here before they're ready. Doesn't mean they have to stay." Her words stayed with me long after she left, in a place where every kindness came wrapped in procedure. Chloe's felt different, like a door cracked open, letting in air I hadn't realized I'd been starving for. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, the kind of quiet day when the air in the hallway felt thick with disinfectant and routine. Chloe came in to check my vitals, her hair pulled back in a loose braid, the faint smell of coffee clinging to her scrubs. She chatted as she worked, her voice light, but her eyes kept flicking toward the open door as if listening for footsteps. When she finished, she didn't leave right away. Instead, she reached into the deep pocket of her uniform and pulled out something small wrapped in a tissue. She held it out to me discreetly. "I shouldn't be doing this," she whispered. "It belonged to one of our residents, Mr. Hollis. His family didn't want his things. I thought maybe you could use it." I unfolded the tissue and saw a small prepaid phone, scratched around the edges, but intact. It was the kind you could buy at a gas station. "Use it if you ever need to call someone who remembers you," she said softly, meeting my eyes. "And don't tell anyone I gave it to you." My throat tightened. The gesture was reckless, maybe even dangerous. But it was also the first real act of faith anyone had shown me since I arrived. I nodded, unable to speak, and slipped the phone into my cardigan pocket. That night, after the last bed check and the hum of the hallway lights softened into the rhythm of sleep, I sat up in bed and turned the phone over in my hands. It felt heavier than it looked. I pressed the power button, half expecting it not to work. The small screen flickered to life, glowing dimly in the dark. I turned toward the window. The night outside was still no sound, but the faraway rumble of the highway and the faint rustle of leaves against the glass. My roommate was already asleep, her breathing even and shallow. I opened the contacts list. Most of the numbers were unfamiliar. Ghosts of someone else's life, daughter, neighbor, pharmacy. I scrolled past them slowly, the soft click of each movement echoing in the quiet. Then I stopped when I saw a name I hadn't thought about in years. Grace Delaney. Grace had been family once, in a way. She was Lara's sister-in-law from her first marriage. A woman with sharp intelligence and a voice that could turn steel gentle. We'd lost touch after the divorce, though she'd written me a Christmas card for 2 years after, ending each one with, "Take care of yourself. Marjorie, you're stronger than you think." Seeing her name now felt like the faintest thread stretched across time. Fragile, but real. My fingers hovered over the call button. My heart thudded so loudly I was sure it would wake my roommate. I didn't press it. Not yet. I wasn't ready to explain where I was, or why. Instead, I saved her number again under a new contact name, Grace Hope, and turned the phone off. I slipped it under my pillow, the weight of it pressing faintly against my ear as I lay down. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel completely powerless. I didn't sleep much that night. But when I finally did, the dreams were different, less like endings. More like beginnings whispered in the dark. For 3 nights, I kept the phone under my pillow, its small weight both comforting and terrifying. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment, though I wasn't sure what that meant anymore. The walls of Willow Creek seemed to listen. Even the hum of the air vent felt watchful. But by the 4th night, I couldn't stand the silence any longer. I turned the phone on, my fingers trembling as I scrolled to her name. The first ring nearly made me hang up. On the 3rd, a woman's voice answered, groggy and unsure. "Hello, Grace," I said quietly. "It's Marjorie. Marjorie Elwood." There was a pause, long enough for my heart to stutter. Then her tone changed awake. Startled. Warm. "Marjorie. Oh my God, it's been years. Are you all right? Where are you calling from?" Her voice still carried that calm steadiness I remembered. The kind that made you believe the world could make sense again if you just explained it to her. I told her where I was. Or tried to. The words came out in pieces: my birthday, the drive, the building, the floral suitcase. For a while, she didn't interrupt. When I finished, the silence on her end felt heavier than the air around me. "Oh, Marjorie," she said finally, her voice soft but edged with anger. "I wish I could say I'm surprised. But I'm not." The words landed like a stone in my chest. "What do you mean?" Grace exhaled slowly. "Lara's been busy. After Daniel died, I think she started seeing you less as her mother and more as an account to manage. I only know because of the divorce, Ben still gets financial statements from some of their old joint accounts. She's been transferring money, little by little, under your name for over a year. She told the bank she has power of attorney, said you've been showing signs of memory decline." The world tilted. I gripped the edge of the mattress to steady myself. "Memory decline," I whispered. "She said that she did." Grace said, "She told everyone you were slipping, that she had to step in before you made mistakes." My throat burned. I tried to speak, but no sound came out. I thought of the conversations we'd had where she'd corrected me gently. "You already told me that, Mom," or "You must have forgotten. We talked about this." I'd started doubting myself without even realizing it. Grace's voice softened. "Marjorie, I think she planned this for a long time. She's got control over most of your accounts. Your house is still protected under that old trust Daniel set up. But she's been using your liquid assets like they're hers." I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling the sharp, hollow ache there. Daniel had always been careful, cautious to a fault. He'd set up that trust so Lara wouldn't be burdened with legal trouble later. I never imagined it would be the one thing saving me now. "She's my daughter," I said, though the words didn't sound right anymore. "I know," Grace replied softly, "and that's what makes it so cruel." For a while, we said nothing. The only sound was the faint static of the phone line and the low hum of the building outside my door. Finally, Grace cleared her throat. Listen to me. You're not crazy, and you're not alone. I can help you, but we have to be careful. Does anyone there monitor your calls? I don't think so. I said, but I can't use this long. It's not mine. Then let's keep it short. I'll find out what she's done and call you tomorrow night, same time. All right, I said, though my voice barely reached a whisper. Hold on. Marjorie, she added gently, you've still got fight left in you. She just made you forget that. When the line went dead, I kept the phone pressed against my ear, listening to the hum of nothing. In the reflection of the window, I saw myself small, gray-haired, trembling, but there was something else in my eyes now, faint, but certain. The shock didn't numb me, it sharpened me. For the first time since Daniel's death, I knew exactly what I had to do. Grace called again the next night, her voice low but steady, as if she were speaking through a locked door. I had been sitting on the edge of the bed, waiting, the phone hidden under my pillow, my heart beating fast enough to drown out the ticking of the clock. I did some digging. She said without preamble, your accounts have been consolidated into a new management portfolio under Lara's name. She's been moving money through a trust fund account that isn't hers to touch. I gripped the phone tighter. A trust fund. Not the old one, she said quickly. Daniel set up a separate trust for the Mount Pleasant house years ago, remember? The one he made irrevocable. The memory rose, vivid and sharp. Daniel sitting at his desk by the window, a thin folder open in front of him, his glasses sliding down his nose. He'd tried to explain it to me then, how he wanted to make sure the house would always stay protected, even if something happened to him. I hadn't paid much attention. We were younger then. I couldn't imagine a world where I'd need protection from my own child. I remember, I said quietly. Grace continued, her voice gaining momentum. That document's bulletproof. It's the one thing Lara can't touch. The deed, the title. Everything tied to that property, it all sits in a safe deposit box at your old bank in Mount Pleasant. And the only signature that can authorize any change is yours. I stood and crossed to the window, pressing my hand against the cool glass. The thought of that small metal box untouched, waiting, sent a strange current through me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something that wasn't fear, it was direction. Where's the key? Grace asked gently, though I could hear she already knew the answer. In my sewing basket, I said after a pause. At the house, it's a small brass key tied with blue thread. Daniel wrapped it that way so I'd never lose it. Silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of what that meant. Then that's what we need to get, Grace said finally. That key means proof and power. But we have to be careful. If Lara finds out you know, she'll lock down everything. I sat back on the bed, staring at the pale lines on my palms. She's already taken everything else. I murmured, not everything, Grace replied. Not your name, not your will, not that key. Her words settled in my chest like an ember, faint but glowing. I had spent months being managed, shuffled, explained away. Now, for the first time, I was the one holding knowledge she didn't have. We talked through possibilities, whispering like conspirators. Grace offered to visit the house to see if she could get inside somehow, but I told her no. Lara still lived there part-time, and I couldn't risk raising suspicion. Besides, I had to be the one to reclaim it. It wasn't just a matter of property. It was proof that I still existed on my own terms. After we hung up, I sat in the dark, the faint light from the hallway spilling under the door. I thought about Daniel again, his patience, the way he planned for every outcome. He must have known something I didn't. Must have sensed how fragile security could be when it depended on love alone. I imagined my sewing basket sitting on the shelf in the front room, the blue thread tied around the small key. I could see the faint sunlight across the hardwood floor. The sound of the ceiling fan creaking overhead. My home, the one I'd kept spotless for years, was now her domain. The thought made my hands tremble, not from fear this time, but from wanting to take it back. The key wasn't just metal and thread, it was the last piece of my life untouched by Lara's control. And somewhere inside me, a quiet resolve began to take shape. Solid and unyielding. I didn't know yet how I'd get to it, but I knew one thing: I wasn't finished. Not by a long stretch. The plan came together quietly, as though it had been waiting for me all along. Chloe didn't say the word escape. She didn't have to. One evening, while changing my linens, she leaned close and whispered, "Tomorrow night, 9:45. That's when the shifts overlap. Don't pack anything that clinks." Her calm terrified me more than her words. The next day passed like a dream half remembered. Every sound felt sharper: the squeak of the medication cart, the faint chatter from the nurse's station, the slow tick of the clock above my bed. My hands trembled when I lifted my spoon at dinner, but I forced myself to eat. I needed the strength. When the hallway lights dimmed and the evening rounds ended, I changed into the clothes Chloe had left me: gray sweatpants, an oversized hoodie that smelled faintly of detergent. Nothing that marked me as a patient, nothing that belonged here. I tucked the prepaid phone into my pocket and sat on the edge of the bed, waiting for the signal. At exactly 9:45, a loud crash echoed from the corridor, metal against tile, followed by Chloe's voice, breathless and apologetic. "Sorry, big spill here. Can someone grab a mop?" My heart jumped. I opened the door a few inches. 2 nurses hurried past, one carrying towels, the other with a bucket. No one looked at me. I stepped out and turned right, keeping to the wall. The corridor felt endless. My pulse drummed in my ears, and every motion seemed louder than it should have been: the soft slap of my shoes, the rustle of fabric. The air smelled faintly of bleach and something sweet, like overripe fruit. I moved faster. The exit Chloe had described was near the laundry room, a side door leading to a small service path. The key card hung from a hook behind a cleaning cart. Just as she'd promised. My hands shook so badly it took 3 tries to swipe it. The light above the door turned green with a soft beep. When the door opened, the outside air hit me like a wave. It smelled of salt and damp earth, cool and real. For the first time in months, there was no ceiling above me, only a sky streaked with clouds and the faint glow of the moon. I swallowed hard, blinking against the sudden sting in my eyes. Grace's car waited just beyond the side gate, headlights off. She stood beside it, her shape outlined by the faint streetlight, her hair pulled back and a scarf around her neck. When she saw me, she lifted a hand. "Quickly," she whispered as I reached her, "before they realize." I climbed into the passenger seat, clutching the phone tight against my chest. My legs felt weak, my breath short. Grace slid behind the wheel, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb in silence. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The sound of the tires on the pavement was steady, hypnotic. I turned to look back at the building. From this distance, Willow Creek looked almost peaceful, warm lights glowing behind curtained windows. A place pretending to be home. Grace's voice broke the silence. "You did it," she said softly. "You're safe now. Safe." The word felt too big, too soon. My hands were still shaking. I pressed them together in my lap and stared out the window as Charleston's edges blurred past the marshes. The low streetlights, the distant line of the bridge. When we finally turned onto the highway, Grace reached over and touched my hand briefly. "We'll head to a motel across the river." I paid in cash. "We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." I nodded, unable to answer. Outside, the night smelled of salt and rain, sharp and alive, and the road opened ahead of us, dark and endless. And for the first time in years, I realized what it felt like to move freely through the world without asking permission. The fear was still there, shallow, quick, electric, but underneath it, something new had begun to stir. It felt small, fragile, and entirely mine. The motel sat just off the highway near the base of the Ravenel Bridge, a 2-story strip of faded doors and flickering lights. The sign buzzed with half-lit letters that spelled Harbor Inn if you squinted, though the O stuttered in and out. Grace parked beneath the shadow of the bridge, the engine idling for a moment before she shut it off. "This will do for the night," she said quietly. "No cameras pointing at the lot. Cash only. The owner doesn't ask questions." Inside, the air smelled faintly of mildew and salt. The carpet was thin, the wallpaper stained near the corners. Grace handed the clerk a few bills, signed a name that wasn't hers, and took a single key. Our room was upstairs, small and dim, with 2 twin beds and a window overlooking the bridge. The hum of traffic rolled in like a restless tide. Every few seconds, the distant thump of a passing truck made the thin glass tremble. I sat on the edge of one of the beds, my hands still shaking. Grace locked the door, drew the curtains, and exhaled for the first time since we'd left Willow Creek. "You did well," she said. "You didn't panic." "I don't feel brave," I murmured. "You don't have to. You just have to stay hidden." I looked down at my hands, the faint tremor still there, as if my body hadn't yet caught up with the idea of safety. The motel's cheap lamp cast a yellow circle on the bedspread, and I realized I hadn't been alone in a room by choice for months. The quiet here wasn't sterile, it was raw and alive. Grace pulled a small laptop from her bag. "There's a man I trust. His name's Marcus Alvarez. He's an elder law attorney in town. Low profile but solid. He helped my aunt with a guardianship case last year. I'll reach out tonight." Her voice steadied as she spoke, the same tone she'd used years ago when helping Laura through her first divorce. She'd always been the kind of woman who solved things by organizing them. I watched as she typed, her fingers moving quickly over the keyboard. The hum of traffic filled the pauses. Each engine that passed outside made my chest tighten. Every sound seemed louder, the hiss of brakes, the rattle of tires on asphalt, the squeak of metal from the bridge's cables. Grace glanced up. "You're safe here, Marjorie. No one knows we're in Charleston yet. I gave the front desk a different last name for you. They'll forget it by morning." I nodded, though my body refused to believe her. I couldn't stop listening for footsteps in the hallway. Every creak made me hold my breath. When she finished her email, Grace closed the laptop and sat beside me. "He'll meet us tomorrow morning, somewhere quiet. We'll tell him everything. What if Laura's already noticed I'm gone?" "She will," Grace said, "but she won't expect help. She's too sure of her story." The certainty in her voice steadied me more than the lock on the door. Still, fear pulsed beneath the surface, thin but constant, like electricity in the walls. Grace offered me one of the motel's small paper cups filled with water. I drank, the metallic taste grounding me. Then I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The bridge lights flickered through the curtains, casting long, shifting lines across the walls. I followed them with my eyes, tracing their pattern until they blurred. Grace turned off the lamp and sat by the window, keeping watch. I could hear her breathing slow and steady against the rhythm of the cars above. I closed my eyes, telling myself that the sound of engines wasn't pursuit. It was just the world still moving, indifferent to us. Sleep came slowly, fragile and shallow. Beneath it, fear curled inside me like a warning I couldn't turn off. But for the first time in months, the door was locked from the inside. and the key was ours. The next morning, light crept across the motel curtains, thin and gray as smoke. Grace was already dressed, her laptop open, a paper cup of coffee cooling by her elbow. When I stirred, she looked up with a flicker of relief. "He'll meet us," she said. 10 o'clock. A diner off Savannah Highway. Quiet place. Feels safe. The word safe had started to sound like a prayer. We drove through the wet morning in silence. The marsh smelled of salt and rain. The sky washed pale above the bridge. I kept my hands folded over my purse, the prepaid phone, my notebook, the tiny stack of things that meant I still had control. The diner was the kind that hadn't changed in decades. Red vinyl booths, coffee thick as tar. A waitress who called everyone Han. In the corner sat a man in a charcoal suit, his files arranged neatly in front of him. "Mrs. Elwood," he said, standing. "Marcus Alvarez. Grace has told me enough to know this will take patience." His voice was steady, his handshake firm. I found myself breathing easier just listening to him. "To challenge your daughter's power of attorney," he explained. "We need two things: proof that you're competent, and proof that she isn't acting in your interest. Without both, the law will favor her." Grace leaned forward. "Where do we start a formal evaluation?" "Quiet, but official. I can arrange it." The words pressed down on me. Evaluation. For so long, Lara had used that very idea to make me doubt myself. But now it would be my proof. "All right," I said. "Do it." 2 days later, Dr. Asha Patel welcomed me into a small office, downtown, walls lined with soft watercolor paintings. "We'll just talk," she said. There's no wrong answer. For 3 hours, I talked about everything the morning of my birthday. The beige walls of Willow Creek, the daughter I'd raised and lost. I expected to falter, but I didn't. When she finished her notes, Dr. Patel smiled gently. "You're lucid, articulate, and fully sound," she said. "You've been deceived, not confused." The next morning, she handed me her report. "No cognitive impairment observed." The words blurred through my tears. Back at the diner, Alvarez reviewed it, his tone calm but firm. "This," he said, tapping the page, "changes everything." He laid out bank records. Grace had helped him find statements, checks, notarized forms. Daniel's old organization had become my salvation. Then Alvarez paused over one page. Brow furrowing. "This notary," he murmured, "died in 2017. Grace looked up sharply. "So it's forged?" "Blatantly," he said. "She faked both your signature and the witness. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's fraud." I stared at the papers. My name printed beside strokes that weren't mine. Rage didn't rise, clarity did. For months, Lara had convinced me I was fading. But the truth sat right there in ink and seal. Grace leaned back, exhaling. "We can prove it." Alvarez nodded. "And we will." The coffee between us had gone cold, but my hands were steady now. For the first time in a long time, I felt something settle inside me like ground after a storm, firm enough to stand on again. The Charleston County Courthouse stood gray and solemn beneath a low, clouded sky. Its columns gleamed faintly from the morning rain, and the flag outside barely stirred. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of polish and old paper, the kind of place where lives were decided by the weight of documents and tone of voices. I sat beside Marcus Alvarez at the long oak table. The stack of evidence in front of us arranged with almost reverent care: bank records, affidavits, copies of every withdrawal, every signature that wasn't mine. Grace sat in the row behind, her steady presence like an anchor in a room that wanted to unmoor me. When the doors opened behind us, I didn't have to turn to know it was Lara. Her perfume reached me first light. Familiar, expensive. Then came her heels, sharp against the marble floor, each step rehearsed. She walked in with the confidence of someone who expected sympathy to follow her like a shadow. Her hair was pinned in a perfect twist, her cream suit pressed without a single crease. Beside her, a man in a navy suit carried her files, her attorney. Mr. Denham, all easy smiles and precise diction. When she saw me, she smiled faintly, as though this were some strained misunderstanding between family members that a bit of civility could smooth away. "Mom," she said quietly, dipping her head as if greeting me at brunch. "You look well." I said nothing. The echo of her voice felt like static in my chest. Judge Merriman entered shortly after, an older man with sharp eyes and a tired posture. He adjusted his glasses, glanced through the case file, and nodded to both counsels. "We're here regarding the petition to revoke power of attorney in the case of Marjorie Elwood versus Lara Elwood." His voice was measured, almost weary. "Let's proceed." Denham stood first. His tone was confident, his phrasing deliberate. "Your Honor, this is a painful family dispute. Nothing more. Mrs. Elwood's daughter has cared for her tirelessly since her husband's passing. Unfortunately, recent influences have convinced her that her daughter's protection is a form of control. My client's only concern has ever been her mother's safety." He gestured toward me briefly, almost kindly, as though acknowledging a child who didn't understand what was happening. "Mrs. Elwood is 73. She's been under emotional strain, easily persuaded by those who wish to profit from discord." Alvarez rose slowly, his expression neutral. "Your Honor," he said, "what my client seeks is not sympathy. She seeks restoration of her legal autonomy and protection from fraud committed in her name." He placed a folder on the table and opened it. "Here is the affidavit from Dr. Asha Patel, a licensed forensic psychiatrist, confirming Mrs. Elwood's mental competence, fully lucid, no cognitive impairment. This alone invalidates any claim that she required guardianship." Denham shifted, clearing his throat. But Alvarez wasn't finished. "Next," he said, sliding forward a printed exhibit, "are the financial documents provided by Wells Federal Bank. These show a series of withdrawals and transfers totaling over $86,000, all bearing my client's forged signature." The judge leaned forward. "Forged, yes, Your Honor. Here." Alvarez lifted two papers and held them up side by side, the original document Daniel and I had signed together years ago, and the more recent one Lara had submitted to authorize a withdrawal. You'll notice the difference immediately. The loop of the E in Elwood is consistent in Mrs. Elwood's legitimate signature, graceful, continuous. The forged version, however, shows hesitation, heavier ink pressure, and a closed loop. He handed both to the clerk, who passed them to the judge. The silence in the room thickened. The judge studied the pages, his brow tightening. "This is quite clear," he murmured. Lara's lawyer spoke quickly. "Your Honor, with respect. My client was managing numerous accounts and documents during an emotionally difficult period. Minor inconsistencies could easily occur." The judge cut him off. "This isn't inconsistency, Mr. Denham. It's forgery." Lara's composure cracked, just slightly. I saw the small twitch in her jaw, the tightness around her eyes. She didn't look at me, but her hand gripped the edge of the table, her nails pale against the wood. Alvarez's voice stayed calm, deliberate. "We also have evidence that the notary listed on this document, Mr. Howard Clive, passed away in 2017. His supposed seal here," he pointed to the embossed mark, "was copied from a record still on file at the county office." The judge leaned back, his fingers steepled. "Mrs. Elwood," he said, turning toward me. Is there anything you'd like to say? I rose slowly. My knees trembled, but my voice didn't. Only that I raised my daughter to tell the truth, I said, and I still hope she remembers how. Lara's head jerked slightly, but she said nothing. The words hung between us like smoke. When I sat down again, the room felt heavier but clearer like air after a storm. The judge called for a recess to review the exhibits. Lara remained frozen in her chair, her knuckles still white. As the clerk gathered the documents, I caught her reflection in the window behind the bench. For the first time, she looked small not because of age, but because the truth had finally drawn its line. And she was standing on the wrong side of it. When the judge called me to the stand, the air in the courtroom seemed to thin. I stood slowly, steadying myself on the table before walking toward the witness chair. Grace sat behind me, her hands clasped tight, and Marcus Alvarez gave a small nod as I passed. The oath blurred in my ears. I said I do, though my voice barely carried. Across the room, Lara sat straight-backed, immaculate, her hands folded neatly over her purse. She didn't look nervous, only determined. As if she'd already rehearsed how to win, Alvarez began quietly. Mrs. Elwood, when did you first realize something was wrong? It wasn't a single day, I said. It crept in. My daughter started telling me I was forgetful. Then she'd insist we'd already talked about things I couldn't remember. I thought maybe she was right. A ripple of whispers passed through the gallery, but I kept my eyes on the judge. When she drove me to Willow Creek, she said it was safer there. She said I'd thank her, but I never agreed to go. I never signed the papers willingly, and I never gave her permission to touch my accounts. My throat felt tight. She made me believe I was losing my mind, but I wasn't. I looked at her then. She kept her gaze fixed on the table, her jaw clenched. I remember everything, I said softly. The words seemed to stop the air itself. I remember your first recital. I continued. The blue dress, the way your shoes pinched your feet. You cried because you thought you missed a note. I told you it was beautiful. I saw her flinch. Barely. I remember the day you left for college. You hugged me and said, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll never leave you alone." But you did, slowly, piece by piece, until I didn't know who you were anymore. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably, eyes down. The silence in the room deepened, thick and fragile. Alvarez lifted a folder and approached. Mrs. Elwood, please confirm this is your true signature. He handed me the trust document Daniel and I had signed years ago. My handwriting flowed across the page. Steady and familiar. Yes, I said. That's mine. Then came the forged version. The same name, but wrong too tight, too heavy. And this, he asked. That's hers, I said quietly. My daughter's. The judge studied both papers. You're certain she copied me? I said. But she forgot the way I looped the E. My husband used to tease me about it, said it looked like a treble clef. The judge nodded once. His voice measured. That will do? When Alvarez thanked me, I stepped down. Knees shaking, but sure. As I passed Lara's table, I caught her eyes. For the first time, her composure faltered. Her lips parted, but no sound came. I returned to my seat beside Grace. The judge's gavel echoed once, final and calm. In the hush that followed, I felt the smallest thing return to me, not victory, not relief, but the quiet weight of my own name, restored at last. The courtroom was silent when Judge Merriman returned from chambers. The light outside had shifted. Late afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows, catching the dust in quiet, golden swirls. I could hear the faint creak of the pew behind me as Grace leaned forward. Her breath held tight. Alvarez sat beside me, calm as ever, though I could see the smallest twitch of his thumb against his pen. Lara's lawyer stood ready, his face a study in forced confidence. Lara sat beside him, her back straight, eyes fixed on the bench. She hadn't looked at me once since I'd stepped down from the witness stand. The judge adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "This has been a difficult case," he began, his voice level but firm. "Family matters always are, but the law deals in facts, not sentiment." He glanced at the files before him, the stack of papers that had cost me my sleep, my savings, nearly my sanity. The evidence presented shows clear instances of financial misrepresentation, forged signatures, and deliberate misuse of power of attorney. Mrs. Elwood's mental competence is fully supported by professional evaluation. Therefore, I am ruling the power of attorney null and void, effective immediately. The words fell like steady rain, no drama, no flourish, just truth given form. The judge continued. "Additionally, given the forged documentation and falsified notary seal, I am ordering a formal investigation into possible fraud and identity theft. This court will refer all findings to the district attorney's office." Lara's composure cracked. "That's ridiculous," she blurted out, standing suddenly. "I was protecting her. I didn't take anything that wasn't mine." "She's confused. She doesn't understand." The judge's gavel struck once, sharp as a gunshot. "Sit down, Ms. Elwood." Her lawyer tugged her sleeve, whispering something urgent, but she pulled her arm away. "I was trying to help," she said again, softer this time, as if she were trying to convince herself. The judge didn't respond. He gathered his notes and rose. "This hearing is adjourned." When his gavel came down a final time, the sound seemed to release the air from the room. Conversations erupted in low murmurs, papers shuffled, shoes scraped against tile. Lara turned toward the gallery, her eyes darting to the back where her husband sat. He didn't meet her gaze. He stood, buttoned his coat, and walked out without a word. For a moment she just stood there, frozen, her hand still resting on the table. Then she grabbed her purse and strode past me, her heels clicking like tiny hammer blows against the marble floor. She didn't look back. I sat still, hands clasped in my lap. Grace reached over and touched my shoulder gently. Alvarez was already packing his files, his movements neat and deliberate. "It's over," he said quietly. "At least the first part. Outside." Charleston was drenched in late afternoon rain. The courthouse steps gleamed like glass, and the smell of wet magnolia hung in the air. People hurried by under umbrellas, their voices muffled by the weather. Grace opened hers and held it over both of us as we stepped into the street. For a moment, I just stood there, feeling the rain on my hands, the air cool and clean against my face. I thought of Daniel the way he used to whistle when storms rolled in. How he'd say rain wasn't sorrow, but renewal. I wondered what he would think of all this, of the quiet war I'd had to wage just to reclaim what was mine. Grace squeezed my arm. "You did it, Marjorie," she said softly. "You got your life back." I nodded, though the words felt heavier than they should have. Victory didn't feel like celebration. It felt like standing in a house after a flood, everything still upright, but you could see where the water had been, across the street. The courthouse loomed gray against the rain. I watched a single droplet slide down the umbrella's edge and fall onto the pavement, shattering into a dozen smaller drops before disappearing into the rest. For the first time in months, I wasn't afraid. The truth had cost me everything it needed to, but it had given me something quiet, steady, and unshakable. As we walked toward the car, the sound of rain softened behind us, and I let it wash through the hollow spaces inside me. It didn't feel like sorrow anymore. It felt like air finding its way back into a long, closed room. A week after the verdict, Charleston felt different. The air was warmer, the city slower, as if the world itself had taken a long breath. I'd been staying in a small, rented apartment near the Battery, a quiet place with peeling shutters and a view of the harbor. Grace insisted I rest, but rest was something I didn't quite remember how to do. That morning, I decided to take a walk. The rain from the night before had left the streets slick and shining. The cafe on the corner smelled of espresso and baked bread, the kind of scent that makes strangers feel like regulars. I ordered a small coffee and, out of old habit, asked the clerk for a $5 lottery ticket. Daniel and I used to buy them sometimes on Saturdays, never seriously, always as a joke. He'd say, "If we win, we'll buy a boat and name it, maybe." The young man behind the counter smiled as he handed me the ticket. "Big draws tonight, ma'am. You feeling lucky?" "Just alive," I said, and tucked it into my purse. I spent the day as quietly as I could, answering calls from Alvarez, writing thank you notes I'd never send, watering the single plant Grace had bought for my windowsill. When evening came, I made soup, turned on the old radio, and sat by the window while the lottery announcer's voice crackled through the static. The numbers came slowly, each one clear and final. I glanced down at the ticket, half listening at first. Then I froze. 1, 2, 3, each number matched. My heart gave a startled jolt, the kind that comes from forgetting how to hope. By the time the announcer finished, I was laughing not loud, not wild, but helplessly, quietly, as if something in the universe had made a mistake in my favor. It wasn't millions, not even close. Just a modest win enough to pay for a small house, maybe reopen a savings account in my own name. But it was mine, earned, unasked for, undeserved maybe, but mine. The coffee on the table had gone cold, but I didn't care. I folded the ticket carefully, slipped it into the blue sweater pocket I still wore most days, and whispered to no one in particular, "Thank you." Outside, the streetlights flickered against the wet pavement, and the city breathed in time with the tide. For the first time in years, the future didn't frighten me. It simply waited. By spring, Charleston had shed its winter gray. The azaleas bloomed along the sidewalks again, and the air carried that soft sweetness that only this city seems to know. I had moved into a small condo on Beaufan Street, just a few blocks from my sister Ellen. The building wasn't grand, its paint chipped a little at the corners, its stairs creaked, but it was mine. Every key, every bill, every choice belonged to me. Ellen visited often, bringing groceries and gossip from her book club. We'd sit on the small balcony drinking tea, watching the carriages roll past. She never asked about Lara, and I never offered. Some silences deserved to stay gentle. With the settlement finalized, I'd used part of the lottery money to start something Daniel would have been proud of, a scholarship for older women returning to school. I named it the Second Bloom Fund. Alvarez handled the paperwork, and Grace helped design the brochure. When the first recipient wrote to thank me, her words felt like sunlight, warm and without demand. I also changed my phone number and rewrote my will. This time, every line was precise, deliberate, written in my own hand. My lawyer smiled when I handed it over. "You've thought of everything," he said. "That's the point," I replied. The days fell into a rhythm: quiet mornings, long walks, evenings spent painting again. My hands had steadied with time. I'd hung one of the new watercolors in the living room, the harbor at dusk. The bridge like a silver thread against the sky. That night, as the sun dipped low beyond the rooftops, I turned on the small lamp by the window, the same lamp that once glowed in Lara's nursery. Its light filled the room with a soft, golden calm. I stood beside it for a long time, watching the street below shimmer in twilight. "This light isn't for waiting anymore," I whispered. "It's for peace." The glow reached the farthest corner of the room, warm and unwavering, and I let it be the only thing still moving as the day folded quietly into night.